It was a quiet Thursday morning at Jefferson Middle School, the kind of day that felt ordinary in every sense. The bell had rung, students filled the halls, and a light drizzle outside made everything seem slower than usual. The 8th grade English class had a substitute teacher that day, Mr. Harris, a retired teacher filling in for the week. He wasn't familiar with the school's layout, but he carried the calm confidence of someone who'd spent decades in classrooms. The students liked him. He was patient, soft-spoken, and didn't raise his voice. Around 10:17 a.m., while students were taking a vocabulary quiz, Mr. Harris heard a distant metallic sound in the hallway. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to draw his attention. He paused, looked toward the door, and saw a faint shadow move across the frosted glass window. At first, he assumed it was a late student or a custodian. But then came another sound, a faint thud, followed by hurried footsteps. The students looked up. "It's fine," he told them, forcing a calm smile. He walked slowly to the classroom door, peered out, and saw nothing but the empty corridor stretching in both directions. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting uneven reflections on the polished floor. Something about the stillness felt wrong. Then, over the intercom, a voice broke the silence. "Attention staff and students, we are now in lockdown. This is not a drill." The room froze. Mr. Harris turned to face 28 students who were suddenly very aware of how quiet the building had become. Training took over, even though it had been years since Mr. Harris had done any real lockdown practice. He moved quickly to the door, locked it, and flipped the lights off. "Everyone to the corner," he whispered. The students shuffled toward the back of the classroom, behind the bookshelf and large cabinet, away from the door's line of sight. The room dimmed, lit only by the faint gray light coming through the blinds. Outside, the hallway remained eerily still. No voices, no movement, just the distant hum of ventilation. Mr. Harris crouched near the door, trying to listen. Every few seconds, a floorboard creaked somewhere beyond the wall. One of the students, a girl named Emily, clutched her phone tightly, her hands trembling. He noticed her typing something but didn't stop her. It was instinct for kids to text their parents in moments like this. "Stay quiet," he mouthed. A faint sound echoed again, a slow dragging noise, like something being pulled across the tiles. His pulse quickened. He leaned forward, listening, every muscle tense. Then came the unmistakable sound of a door handle being tested somewhere down the hall. A gentle click, click, click. It wasn't forceful. It was slow, deliberate. Whoever was out there wasn't running, they were checking rooms one by one. Mr. Harris's throat went dry. He slowly backed away from the door and positioned himself between the students and the entrance, heart pounding so loudly he thought they might hear it. The intercom stayed silent. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The students barely breathed. Mr. Harris could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the faint ticking of the wall clock, and the occasional nervous shuffle of shoes against the floor. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, growing louder. They echoed faintly through the corridor outside. The sound wasn't rushed, it had rhythm, like someone pacing carefully, stopping every few doors. Mr. Harris felt the temperature in the room drop as adrenaline surged through his body. A few students looked at him, eyes wide with silent questions he couldn't answer. The footsteps stopped, right outside their door. He could see a shadow under the small crack between the door and the floor, motionless. Then came the soft sound of a gloved hand brushing the metal handle. It turned once. Locked. It rattled again, slightly harder this time. Mr. Harris held his breath. The sound stopped, followed by silence so heavy that even the building itself seemed to hold still. Then, faintly, came the sound of whispering from somewhere farther down the hall. A voice, too soft to make out words, then another, sharper sound, maybe a shoe scuffing against the floor. Mr. Harris couldn't tell how many people were out there, but he knew they weren't staff. He leaned against the wall, waiting. Then, a sudden noise erupted, metallic, echoing, a locker slamming shut, followed by a brief yell. One of the students whimpered quietly. Mr. Harris motioned for silence again, praying whatever was happening outside would move farther away. For a long, breathless moment, it did. 10 minutes into the lockdown, phones began to buzz quietly in the dark. The glow of screens cast pale light over frightened faces. One student showed Mr. Harris a message from her mother. "Heard there's a lockdown. Are you okay? News says police are on scene." He hadn't heard sirens yet, but the fact that the outside world already knew made him realize this wasn't a drill. Somewhere in the building, something real was happening. He texted the main office, typing as silently as he could, "Room 214 secure. 28 students." No reply. The network lagged, typical for the old school building. He waited, but the message stayed unsent. Outside, the footsteps had stopped completely. Then, another noise. Distant, rhythmic thuds. It almost sounded like doors being kicked, or lockers hit with something heavy. Mr. Harris couldn't tell how far away it was. His instinct told him it was on the other side of the building. A student whispered, "Is it a shooter?" Mr. Harris shook his head slightly, though he didn't know. "We stay quiet," he mouthed. Then the intercom crackled again, startling everyone. Static filled the room, followed by a muffled voice, "All students remain in lockdown until further notice. Law enforcement is on site." The voice cut off mid-sentence. The line went dead. Mr. Harris turned toward the students. Some were crying silently. Others clung to each other. The reality of the situation had sunk in. The school wasn't safe, and help was still outside. The sound of boots pounding echoed faintly from down the hallway. This time, it was faster, more coordinated, several pairs, not one. For a split second, Mr. Harris wondered if it was the police, but there were no shouted commands, no radios, no warnings. The rhythm stopped again, then resumed, closer. The door's handle moved once more, 2 sharp rattles, then silence. He crouched low, his ear near the floor. Through the tiny slit of light from the hallway, he saw movement, a figure standing still, facing the door. Whoever it was stayed there for several seconds, almost like they were listening. Then, the faint metallic sound again, something dragging along the lockers. It scraped slowly, metallic and deliberate, moving away from the classroom. Mr. Harris felt cold sweat trickle down his temple. Whoever was out there was taking their time. Finally, the sound faded. The students sat motionless. Someone whispered a prayer under their breath. Then, another vibration. Emily's phone lit up again, "Police surrounding building. Don't open door for anyone." That message changed everything. Mr. Harris realized they could no longer trust the sound of footsteps, or voices in the hallway. For all he knew, whoever was inside could pretend to be police to get access. He gestured for everyone to move farther from the door. His hand shook slightly as he reached for a metal ruler on the desk, gripping it tightly though he knew it wouldn't help much. The building felt heavy with tension. Then, suddenly, a loud knock echoed down the hall. 3 sharp bangs. Then nothing. Time dissolved. Mr. Harris had no idea how long they'd been sitting there. Some of the students began to breathe shallowly, on the verge of panic. The clock on the wall read 11:02. Nearly 45 minutes had passed since the lockdown began. Outside, occasional bangs still echoed, but farther away now. The pattern suggested movement. Whatever was happening, it was shifting through the school. Suddenly, the sound of a door opening echoed faintly, followed by a calm, male voice, "Police. Everyone stay where you are." Mr. Harris froze. The voice was steady but distant. It came again, louder, "This is law enforcement. Stay in your classrooms." He couldn't tell if it was real. It could have been a recording or someone mimicking authority. He whispered to the class, "Nobody move. Nobody answer." The minutes crawled by. The footsteps grew louder again, stopping intermittently. At one point, they stopped right outside their door. Then came the unmistakable metallic sound of keys jingling, someone testing different ones. The handle clicked twice but didn't open. Whoever it was seemed frustrated. Then, another voice, this time more authoritative, "Urgent, police. Announce yourselves." 2 sets of footsteps now. Mr. Harris felt paralyzed, uncertain which voice to trust. Then came a single, distant shout, followed by the unmistakable boom of something heavy hitting the floor. A radio crackled faintly afterward. He realized then that whatever was happening was real. The police were inside. But so was someone else. At 11:46 a.m., the intercom came alive again. "Attention staff and students," the principal's voice trembled slightly. "The lockdown has been lifted. Please remain in your rooms until an officer escorts you out." The students exhaled in near silence, relief mixed with confusion. Mr. Harris still didn't move. He wasn't ready to trust it yet. After everything he'd heard, the idea of simply opening the door felt impossible. 5 minutes later, heavy boots approached. "Room 214, a firm voice called. "Sheriff's Department. We're clearing the floor." Mr. Harris stepped closer to the door, voice low. Badge through the window. A hand appeared, holding up a silver badge and ID card. He unlocked the door. The hallway beyond was filled with officers, vests, radios, rifles, all moving in practiced unison. They ushered the students out quietly, one line at a time. The air outside the classroom felt strange, thick, heavy with the scent of cleaning chemicals and fear. Down the hall, other doors opened. Some teachers were crying. A few students hugged their friends as they passed uniformed officers. Mr. Harris asked one deputy what had happened. The man hesitated, then said quietly, "We got a call about an intruder. Someone pulled a fire door open from outside. We found them near the gym. They're in custody." It was over. But the way he said it, "in custody," made it clear the person hadn't come to talk. They'd come prepared for something far worse. Days later, the lockdown still haunted the students and staff. Local news confirmed the intruder was a former maintenance worker with a history of mental illness, found carrying a crowbar and a replica firearm. He'd slipped into the school during morning deliveries. No one was hurt, but it easily could have ended differently. For Mr. Harris, the experience changed everything. He'd taught for over 30 years, seen all kinds of classroom chaos, but nothing compared to those 90 minutes of silence and fear. He replayed the sounds in his mind, the dragging noise, the rattling handle, the whispered voice in the hall. Each time he tried to sleep, he'd see that faint shadow under the door again. When he returned to the school weeks later to finish his substitute term, students greeted him quietly. They trusted him now in a way that only shared fear could create. Security at Jefferson Middle changed overnight. Cameras were upgraded. Entry points were reinforced. Teachers now carried keys on quick-release lanyards. But no one forgot the sound of that lockdown announcement, or the way their hearts stopped at those words, "This is not a drill." Mr. Harris never taught full-time again after that semester. When asked why, he simply said, "I got reminded how fragile a quiet day can be." It was supposed to be a normal morning. It turned into a story none of them would ever forget. The alarm stopped abruptly, leaving only silence and ringing ears. The transition was jarring. Then came a new sound, the squeak of shoes on linoleum, slow, careful steps. Mrs. Cortez crouched lower, peering through the crack between the blinds. Outside, the hallway lights flickered. A shadow moved past the glass, tall, slender, but quick. She couldn't tell if it was a student or an adult. The figure stopped, turned slightly toward their door, then kept walking. Every student held their breath. Then came the muffled thud of a door closing somewhere nearby, followed by the faint sound of metal scraping against metal. Noah gripped his backpack straps tightly, whispering, "They're trying to get in somewhere." Mrs. Cortez raised a finger to her lips. Her own pulse thundered in her ears. Another noise, heavier this time. A crash echoed down the hall, followed by shouts. One voice, male, panicked, yelled, "Get back!" Then silence. The seconds stretched endlessly. Finally, her phone buzzed with a text from another teacher, "We're safe in the library. Police on the way." Might be a false alarm, but someone got hurt running. False alarm? That didn't make sense. The sounds outside hadn't been fake. Something real was happening, even if no one could piece it together. Mrs. Cortez looked toward the door again, trying to listen. The quiet had weight. Then came one final sound, soft, close, right outside the door. 3 slow knocks. And then a voice whispered, just loud enough to hear, "It's safe now." Every instinct screamed that it wasn't safe. Mrs. Cortez shook her head sharply, signaling the students to stay down. Whoever whispered outside didn't identify themselves, didn't use the code phrase staff were told to expect from police. Then, faintly, a second voice echoed from farther down the hallway, "Official, urgent, this is law enforcement. Do not open any doors." The two voices overlapped. One calm and reassuring, one authoritative and commanding. Which one was real? No one dared speak. The handle on the classroom door twitched once, then rattled violently. Several students gasped, covering their mouths. The noise stopped, replaced by hurried footsteps retreating down the hall. Then silence again. Mrs. Cortez's hands were trembling now. She crouched by the emergency intercom button, but before she could press it, her phone lit up, confirmed false alarm, no shooter. Malfunction in lockdown system. Police on site checking building. The relief was immediate, but it didn't feel real. The message came from the district alert system, but how could it be a malfunction? Someone had been in the hall. She'd heard them. 10 minutes later, the principal's voice came over the intercom once more, steadier this time. Lockdown has been lifted. Please remain calm and follow officer directions. Mrs. Cortez still didn't move. She waited for the footsteps, the visual confirmation of uniforms outside. Only when a police officer knocked, flashing a badge through the window, did she unlock the door. The hallway was lined with officers, radios crackling, but not a single intruder in sight. The students shuffled out in silence, eyes darting between classrooms. Teachers stood in doorways, visibly shaken. The police presence was heavy, several units outside, ambulances idling with lights flashing. The malfunction, as it turned out, was more complicated. Someone had tripped a security lockdown manually from the admin panel. But when the school's IT staff reviewed the system, they found it hadn't been an accident. The lockdown command had been triggered remotely. The account used belonged to a former staff member who had left months earlier. That person was nowhere near the school that day. Their credentials had been compromised. No shooter. No intruder. But something about the timing of the alarms and the false voice on the intercom still raised questions. Mrs. Cortez gave her statement to police and went home early. That night, as she sat in her living room, she couldn't stop replaying the whisper outside her door. The tone had been too soft, too deliberate, like someone testing her reaction. She checked the local news later. The district blamed a software breach. Parents demanded answers. But for the people who had been there, especially in those dark classrooms, the explanation didn't erase the fear. The noises, the knocks, the overlapping voices, those were never accounted for. The students shuffled out in silence, eyes darting between classrooms. Teachers stood in doorways, visibly shaken. The police presence was heavy, several units outside, ambulances idling with lights flashing. The malfunction, as it turned out, was more complicated. Someone had tripped a security lockdown manually from the admin panel. But when the school's IT staff reviewed the system, they found it hadn't been an accident. The lockdown command had been triggered remotely. The account used belonged to a former staff member who had left months earlier. That person was nowhere near the school that day. Their credentials had been compromised. No shooter. No intruder. But something about the timing of the alarms and the false voice on the intercom still raised questions. Mrs. Cortez gave her statement to police and went home early. That night, as she sat in her living room, she couldn't stop replaying the whisper outside her door. The tone had been too soft, too deliberate, like someone testing her reaction. She checked the local news later. The district blamed a software breach. Parents demanded answers. But for the people who had been there, especially in those dark classrooms, the explanation didn't erase the fear. The noises, the knocks, the overlapping voices, those were never accounted for. Days later, a police report confirmed that the school's lockdown system had been accessed from an external network at 9:40 a.m., 1 minute before the lockdown began. The system repeated the audio twice, causing confusion. But what caught investigators' attention was the fire alarm activation. It hadn't come from the control panel. It had been pulled manually from the second-floor hallway. Security footage should have shown who did it, but when technicians reviewed the recordings, there were gaps, 27 minutes of blank video. The timestamp matched the lockdown period exactly. Mrs. Cortez was called in for a follow-up interview. She described the voices she'd heard, the knocks on the door, and the shadow through the glass. The officer nodded, noting it all, but she could tell he didn't have answers. That night, she received an email from the school district. "We assure you, this incident was an isolated technical error." She deleted it. At home, she checked her phone. The class group chat still had messages from that morning. One student had recorded audio accidentally when their phone screen was pressed in their pocket. The clip lasted only 18 seconds. She pressed play. The sound was faint but clear: footsteps, a low metallic clatter, and then, unmistakably, a voice whispering, "It's safe now." Her blood ran cold. The voice wasn't from anyone she knew. 2 weeks later, Lincoln High reopened fully. Students were hesitant at first, but routine slowly returned. The administration upgraded their security protocols, added facial ID locks to access control systems, and reassured everyone it couldn't happen again. But the teachers still talked quietly among themselves. A custodian had claimed to see someone near the east exit that morning, a man wearing staff colors but no badge. The security team never confirmed it. Mrs. Cortez tried to move on. Yet, every time the PA system crackled for morning announcements, she felt her chest tighten. The memory of that distorted voice, the one pretending to be their principal, wouldn't fade. Then, one morning in February, the intercom came alive during homeroom. "Attention, all staff and students. Please initiate lockdown procedure." Students froze. Mrs. Cortez's heart stopped, until the voice added, "For a scheduled safety drill." The room exhaled, laughter rippling nervously. But even as she smiled, something deep inside her whispered that drills no longer meant safety. They meant memories, of whispers, glitches, and silence. The event at Lincoln High never made national headlines. Officially, it was logged as a technical incident. But to those who experienced it, it was a reminder that fear doesn't always need violence to be real. Sometimes, the unknown is enough. In interviews months later, the police admitted they never identified who triggered the lockdown or disabled the cameras. The system logs were wiped clean. The trail ended abruptly. Mrs. Cortez eventually transferred to another school. She said she couldn't stand the sound of intercom static anymore. Some of her former students stayed in touch, still joking about the day the alarm went crazy. But a few admitted they still had nightmares about those minutes in the dark. The false alarm changed how the district handled emergencies. Every lockdown after that was treated as a real one, no matter what. But the bigger question remained: if it wasn't an accident, who wanted that school to panic? No answer ever came. And for Mrs. Cortez, that was the most disturbing part of all, knowing that someone, somewhere, had caused a moment of pure fear, just to watch what people would do. Story 3: The Stranger at the Fence. Part 1: A Quiet Morning. Brookview Elementary was the kind of small-town school where everyone knew everyone, the kind of place that still did morning announcements over the loudspeaker and let kids play outside after lunch. It sat on the edge of town, bordered by tall oaks and an old wire fence that separated the playground from a quiet stretch of forest. On a cold Thursday morning in late October, the sky was gray and heavy with clouds. Students filled the hallways, laughing, carrying art projects and lunchboxes. The day felt peaceful, until just before recess. At 10:23 a.m., the front office received a call from a parent driving past the school. The voice on the line was calm but uneasy. "I just saw someone standing by the back fence, near the playground." They weren't moving. The secretary looked out the window, but from her angle she couldn't see much. She notified the principal, who radioed the groundskeeper. Within minutes, a teacher on recess duty confirmed the sighting, a tall man, wearing dark clothes, standing just beyond the fence line, watching silently. When the principal stepped outside to check, the man was gone. 10 minutes later, as classes resumed, a new announcement came over the intercom: "Teachers, please keep all students indoors until further notice." No one thought much of it at first. In a small town, things like this rarely turned serious. But that calm would not last. Part 2, the lockdown begins. By 10:40, a second call came through, this time from a teacher whose classroom overlooked the playground. She said the man was back, standing in almost the same spot as before, motionless. Only now, he was closer to the fence. The principal moved quickly. The voice over the intercom was steady but firm: "Attention staff and students, we are now in lockdown. Please follow procedure." The kindergarten teachers moved fast, pulling curtains and ushering kids to sit quietly on the rug. Older students lined up against walls, whispering nervously. Most assumed it was just practice, but the tone in the principal's voice told the staff otherwise. In room 12, Ms. Dyer, a fourth-grade teacher, crouched near the window. Through a small gap in the blinds, she saw movement, the man again, pacing slowly along the fence line. He didn't look like a parent. He was tall, wearing a hooded jacket, jeans, and work boots. He seemed to be muttering to himself. Ms. Dyer called the office from her classroom phone. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Then, faintly, from the far end of the playground, came the metallic sound of the gate creaking. Her heart sank. She whispered to her students, away from the window. Now. The gate wasn't supposed to move like that. It was padlocked. Or at least, it should have been. Part 3, the gate. The squealing sound echoed through the quiet halls, faint, but enough to set nerves on edge. Ms. Dyer's students crouched behind the bookshelf, some whispering, others silently crying. She moved to the window again, just enough to peek through the blinds. The gate at the far corner of the fence now stood open, swinging slightly in the wind. The man was gone. Her first thought was that he'd left, until she noticed something else. A dark shape by the gym doors. Someone standing there, just outside the camera's blind spot. Ms. Dyer grabbed the phone again, whispering to the office line. Still dead. The internet had dropped too. No Wi-Fi, no connection. Then came the sound of running feet, not inside, but outside the building, along the gravel path that led toward the rear parking lot. She ducked down, heart racing. Moments later, faint voices echoed, male, shouting. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent. Then the distant wail of sirens cut through the still air. For a moment, she felt relief. Someone had called the police. But as she looked back through the blinds one last time, her stomach tightened. The man was now standing near the back door, one hand pressed against the glass, staring in. He wasn't trying to hide. He wanted to be seen. Part 3, the gate. The squealing sound echoed through the quiet halls, faint, but enough to set nerves on edge. Ms. Dyer's students crouched behind the bookshelf, some whispering, others silently crying. She moved to the window again, just enough to peek through the blinds. The gate at the far corner of the fence now stood open, swinging slightly in the wind. The man was gone. Her first thought was that he'd left, until she noticed something else. A dark shape by the gym doors. Someone standing there, just outside the camera's blind spot. Ms. Dyer grabbed the phone again, whispering to the office line. Still dead. The internet had dropped too. No Wi-Fi, no connection. Then came the sound of running feet, not inside, but outside the building, along the gravel path that led toward the rear parking lot. She ducked down, heart racing. Moments later, faint voices echoed, male, shouting. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent. Then the distant wail of sirens cut through the still air. For a moment, she felt relief. Someone had called the police. But as she looked back through the blinds one last time, her stomach tightened. The man was now standing near the back door, one hand pressed against the glass, staring in. He wasn't trying to hide. He wanted to be seen. Part 4, The Stranger Moves. The man didn't try to open the door. He just stood there, motionless, head tilted slightly to one side. The sight froze Ms. Dyer in place. Even from across the courtyard, she could see his face now, pale, expressionless, like someone half asleep. Then, slowly, he raised his other hand and started tapping the glass. 3 slow taps. Students whimpered quietly behind her. She whispered, "It's okay," even though it wasn't. Moments later, the tapping stopped. The man stepped back, turned, and began walking along the building toward the east wing, toward the classrooms. The sirens grew louder outside. 2 police cars pulled up near the main office. Officers moved quickly, scanning the area, shouting commands that echoed through the corridors. Then came a new noise, the sound of the back door opening. Ms. Dyer's blood ran cold. She had heard the click. Someone inside must have unlocked it, maybe thinking it was an officer. She reached for her classroom lock again, double-checking it, her breath shallow. The hallway outside remained quiet for several seconds, until heavy footsteps began moving down the corridor. Not running. Not rushing. Just walking. Slowly. Each step came closer. Part 5, The Footsteps. The steps were steady, unhurried, echoing faintly off the linoleum floors. Ms. Dyer could hear them now, just beyond her classroom door. Her hand trembled against the cold metal handle. "Everyone quiet," she whispered. The footsteps stopped directly outside. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that makes every sound, even a heartbeat, feel deafening. Then came a faint tapping sound on the door. Not knocking, tapping, with a fingernail or maybe a ring. Tap. 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 One of the students began to cry. Ms. Dyer turned and pressed a finger to her lips, shaking her head, eyes wide. Then the tapping stopped. The sound of movement again, fading footsteps, moving farther down the hall. Minutes passed. The sirens outside grew louder. She thought she heard shouting again, commands from police officers, echoing closer. Finally, there was a loud voice, "This is the sheriff's department. Stay in your classrooms." Ms. Dyer didn't move. She waited until a uniformed officer appeared in the window, flashlight beams sweeping the room. Only then did she unlock the door. When the officers entered, one asked quietly, "Did you see him?" She nodded, pointing toward the back of the building. The officer's face tightened. That door was locked when we got here. Ms. Dyer froze. If it was locked when police arrived, then who, or what, had opened it? Part 6, The Search. Police searched the building for nearly an hour. Every hallway, every classroom, every closet. They found the back door firmly secured, no signs of forced entry. The fence gate, however, was broken, the padlock cut clean through. Officers reviewed the exterior cameras, but the footage only deepened the mystery. The man could be seen standing by the fence for several minutes, then walking out of frame toward the east wing. After that, the feed glitched, 10 seconds of static, and when the picture returned, the area was empty. No one ever saw him leave. By noon, officers declared the building safe. Parents were notified, and the students were dismissed early. As Ms. Dyer left with her class, she noticed something chilling. The back door where she'd seen the man earlier had smudged fingerprints, long and faint, like someone dragging their hand down the glass. That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed the image in her mind, his blank expression, the slow tapping on the window, the cut lock. Police promised to patrol the area for the next few days. But deep down, she knew that whoever he was, he'd known exactly where to go, and exactly when to appear. Part 7, The Return. 3 days later, on Sunday morning, the custodian reported something strange. When he arrived to clean, he found the back gate open again, even though it had been replaced and secured the day before. He followed the fence line cautiously, flashlight cutting through the mist. That's when he saw it. Near the far corner, pressed into the soft dirt, were 2 large footprints, side by side, facing the school. He called the police immediately. They searched the perimeter again but found nothing else. No vehicle tracks, no sign of forced entry. Ms. Dyer received the update through the staff group chat. Her stomach tightened. It meant he'd been back, quietly, watching again. The next week, the school installed new floodlights and extended the fence line deeper into the woods. For a while, things returned to normal. But some nights, teachers who stayed late swore they could hear faint metallic sounds near the back lot, like the clinking of chain links being disturbed. Each report was written off as wind or animals. But Ms. Dyer never parked near that side again. Part 8, The Memory. Months passed. Spring came and went. The lockdown became just another story, something teachers mentioned to new staff during safety meetings. The man was never identified, no arrests were made, and the case quietly faded. But for those who had been there, it never really ended. Sometimes, during recess duty, Ms. Dyer would glance toward the tree line beyond the new fence. Every so often, she thought she saw movement, a shadow that disappeared the second she focused on it. The police had called him a trespasser, possibly homeless. But no one ever explained how he'd bypassed the locks, or why he seemed to know when the playground was empty. When asked about it years later, Ms. Dyer said the most unnerving part wasn't seeing him. It was realizing that he never said a word. He didn't threaten, didn't run, didn't hide. He just stood there, watching. And sometimes, she'd add quietly, she could still hear that sound in her sleep, 3 slow taps on the glass, echoing through a perfectly ordinary day that never felt safe again. The beginning of wonder. From the first spark of curiosity, humanity has looked into the unknown and whispered the same question: why? Why does the universe exist? Why do we exist within it? Why do the laws of nature seem written with mathematical precision, yet leave so much unexplained? We live in an age of breathtaking discovery. We can map the atoms in our cells, detect ripples in spacetime, and even peer back to the dawn of creation itself. And yet, for every mystery solved, new and deeper enigmas unfold. Consciousness, time, dark energy, the birth of reality, each one challenges not only our science, but our imagination. In this film, we journey through 10 mind-blowing mysteries that science still can't explain, not because our instruments fail, but because reality itself resists being captured by logic alone. These mysteries are not errors in our understanding. They are signposts pointing towards something greater, something hidden behind the surface of what we call real. So tonight, let's step beyond the comfort of certainty. Let's venture into the unknown, where science meets philosophy, and imagination becomes our only compass. Because the most astonishing discoveries aren't found in laboratories, they begin with a single thought: what if everything we think we know is only half the story? The mystery of consciousness. Before exploring the cosmos, we must confront the first and most intimate mystery: ourselves. What is consciousness? Why does a collection of neurons inside the skull produce the vivid experience of being alive? Science can describe the brain in extraordinary detail: synapses firing, chemicals flowing, circuits lighting up like a cosmic web. But describing how matter gives rise to awareness remains an unsolved riddle known as the hard problem of consciousness. How can atoms, blind and mindless, generate thoughts, memories, emotions, and dreams? No equation, no biological theory, no neural map fully explains this leap from chemistry to experience. Some researchers suggest consciousness is an emergent property, that when enough complexity arises, awareness appears like a spark. Others believe it may be fundamental, a basic feature of the universe itself, woven into reality like space and time. If consciousness is fundamental, then everything, from galaxies to electrons, might possess a fragment of awareness. This idea, known as panpsychism, suggests that the universe could be awake in ways we cannot yet comprehend. When you close your eyes and imagine, you are not escaping the universe, you are participating in its deepest mystery. The universe looks back through you. And perhaps that's where understanding truly begins, not with the stars above, but with the spark within. Story 4, The Silent Hallway. Part 1, The Warning. Jefferson High was a normal public school, overcrowded, underfunded, but safe. At least, that's what everyone thought. The students joked about lockdown drills, treating them like breaks from class. But on a chilly Friday morning in November, no one was laughing. At 9:37 a.m., a quiet buzz spread through the sophomore hallway. A few students had seen something on social media, a vague post on a student's private account. It said, "You'll all see what happens today." The account belonged to a boy named Ryan Keller, a quiet junior with few friends and a reputation for being withdrawn. Teachers knew him as polite but distant. By 9:50, the assistant principal had been shown the post. He called Ryan to the office. But when the secretary went to fetch him from class, his seat was empty. The teacher assumed he was in the restroom. But when 10 minutes passed, and he didn't return, the uneasy feeling spread. Then came a call over the intercom, short, tense: "Attention staff, initiate lockdown immediately. Doors locked. Lights off. Students pulled into corners." At first, they thought it was a drill. But in the silent tension that followed, they could hear the faint, hollow echo of footsteps in the hall. Part 2, The First Sound. The hallways of Jefferson High were built with tiled floors and metal lockers that made every sound carry. From behind locked doors, the teachers and students could hear it: slow, deliberate footsteps echoing down the main hall. No one spoke. No one dared move. In room 204, history teacher Mr. Lang crouched beside his desk, whispering to the class to stay calm. One of the students, a girl near the window, mouthed, "Is it a drill?" He didn't answer. The footsteps stopped right outside their door. Then came a faint metallic sound, the handle turning slightly. Locked. A pause. Then another twist, harder this time. Someone was checking. Mr. Lang reached for his phone, but the screen froze, no signal. The school's reception always dropped during lockdowns because of the concrete structure. A few desks away, a boy began to quietly sob. Mr. Lang slowly raised his hand, signaling everyone to stay quiet. After several seconds, the handle stopped moving. The footsteps continued down the hall. Somewhere, a door slammed. Then silence. Minutes later, the faint wail of police sirens drifted in from outside, but they were still far away. Part 3, the camera feed. In the main office, Principal Hartman sat with two officers from the local precinct. They had accessed the school's camera feed. The grainy footage showed the second-floor hallway, and Ryan Keller, wearing a dark hoodie, walking slowly past lockers. He wasn't holding anything visible. His movements were calm, almost casual. But something about the way he moved was unsettling. He kept glancing at doors, listening, occasionally tugging on handles. At 10:03, he stopped near the science wing and looked directly at a camera. He smiled. Then, the feed cut to static. "Which room is that?" one officer asked. The secretary replied quietly, "That's 2B, the chemistry lab." Officers began clearing the first floor, weapons drawn. Teachers were told to remain locked down. Meanwhile, upstairs, the silence deepened. Students in nearby rooms texted family members under desks, whispering prayers. Then, a faint sound came over the school PA, a soft crackle, followed by static. No one spoke, but everyone could hear it. Someone had picked up the intercom microphone. Part 4, the voice. The intercom hissed again, then a quiet voice, distorted, almost whispering. "You all never listened." The words echoed through every classroom. Students froze. Some started crying quietly. In the office, officers exchanged looks. One of them gestured for the PA controls. But the system had been manually overridden. For the next 30 seconds, there was only silence. Then came the same voice again. "Now you will." The feed cut. Officers rushed upstairs. They found the hallway empty, no sign of Ryan. The chemistry lab door was open, but the room was vacant. A single chair was turned over. And on the teacher's desk sat Ryan's phone, still recording a live stream that had already gathered dozens of viewers. It showed only the floor, with faint breathing sounds in the background. When police checked the adjacent classrooms, one door was unlocked. Inside, they found two terrified students hiding. They said he'd entered their room, told them to stay quiet, and left. No weapon, no violence. Just words. Part 5, the second floor. By 10:20 a.m., the lockdown was in full effect. SWAT had arrived, and police began a room-by-room sweep. Students were evacuated in groups, hands over heads, escorted by armed officers. But Ryan remained missing. The school was sealed, every exit covered, yet there was no trace of him on any camera past 10:04. Officers checked bathrooms, maintenance closets, even crawl spaces above the ceiling. Nothing. In room 204, Mr. Lang and his students still hadn't been cleared. They listened as boots thudded past outside, radios crackling. Then, suddenly, the PA system came alive again. This time, it was Principal Hartman. All students and staff, remain calm. We are conducting final checks. Everyone exhaled, a hint of relief. But in the main office, the principal hadn't touched the microphone. The officers stared at him, realizing at the same time, the voice they'd just heard wasn't his. Part 6, The Basement. Jefferson High had an old basement, built decades earlier when the school was smaller. It was rarely used, mostly for storage. Few people even had the key. When officers finally checked it, they found the door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was cold and musty. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with old textbooks and desks. A single light flickered overhead. At the far end of the room sat Ryan Keller. He was unarmed, sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring blankly at the wall. When officers ordered him to stand, he didn't move. He just said quietly, "It's already done." They cuffed him without resistance. On the floor beside him was a small tape recorder. When police played it, they heard the same words that had echoed through the intercom earlier: "You all never listened, now you will." He'd recorded it in advance. The live stream, the missing signal, the panic, all deliberate. But what disturbed investigators most wasn't the recording. It was what was written on the wall in black marker. Silence speaks loudest. Part 7, Aftermath. Ryan was taken into custody without incident. No weapons were found, and no one was harmed. But the psychological damage was deep. Students began reporting nightmares, panic attacks, and fear of returning to school. Teachers described the silence during the lockdown as the longest 30 minutes of their lives. When questioned, Ryan said he wanted people to feel ignored like he always did. He claimed he never intended violence, only fear. Still, the incident made national headlines. Jefferson High shut down for 2 weeks. New security measures were added, cameras replaced, and the PA system reprogrammed. But the damage couldn't be undone. Even after classes resumed, students flinched at every loud noise. Teachers kept doors locked even during lessons. And the phrase, "silent hallway," became a whispered nickname for that part of the building. Part 8, The Empty Desk. Months later, the school tried to move on. Ryan was transferred to a psychiatric facility, his trial postponed indefinitely. In his former classroom, his desk remained empty. The teacher never reassigned it, a silent reminder of what happened. Students would sometimes glance at it during tests, as if expecting someone to walk through the door again. Security cameras captured nothing unusual afterward, but every so often, late at night, custodians claimed to hear faint static from the PA system, as if someone were testing the mic. When they checked, it was always off. Years later, Principal Hartman retired. In his farewell speech, he mentioned that the worst sound he ever heard wasn't a scream or a gunshot. It was the silence, that long, heavy, breathless silence when everyone was waiting for something to happen. And in that silence, the school learned something haunting. Sometimes the most terrifying sound is nothing at all. East Ridge High School was large, nearly 2,000 students packed into a sprawling campus of glass hallways and connected wings. Lockdown drills were routine, usually announced in advance. But on a Wednesday morning in early March, the intercom tone sounded unexpectedly. "Attention staff and students, we are now in lockdown. This is not a drill." The voice of Principal Alvarez was firm, but slightly shaken. In room 317, English teacher Mrs. Nolan looked up from her desk, immediately locking the door. The students went quiet. Everyone assumed it was another false alarm. The first few minutes of lockdowns always felt that way, surreal, confusing. But as the minutes dragged on, something about the silence outside began to feel wrong. Phones buzzed. Parents texted. Rumors spread quickly through group chats. Someone had seen a man near the parking lot carrying something that looked like a weapon. Within 10 minutes, the school resource officer confirmed a possible armed suspect on campus. The building went dark, lights out, blinds down, phones silenced. That's when Mrs. Nolan realized the hallway outside wasn't just silent, it was empty. Not a single sound. And it would stay that way, for the next 6 hours. In the security office, 2 officers huddled over a bank of screens. The grainy camera feed showed empty corridors, classrooms locked tight. At 10:08 a.m., one camera flickered, movement near the cafeteria entrance. A tall figure in dark clothing slipped briefly into frame, then out again. "Pause that," one officer said. They replayed it 3 times. The man appeared to be carrying a duffel bag. But his face was obscured. The feed glitched again, this time cutting out completely. A power surge. "Lock the doors." "Full perimeter," the lead officer ordered. Outside, police cruisers formed a barricade. Helicopters hovered overhead. Inside, every student sat in silence, hundreds of them huddled under desks, behind cabinets, some praying, others frozen in disbelief. In one classroom, a student quietly texted his mom, "We don't know what's happening. It's been 40 minutes. The reply came seconds later, "Stay down. Don't make a sound. Police are outside." The student typed back one final message, "I can hear footsteps." The west wing of East Ridge High was furthest from the main office, older, with dim lighting and long, echoing hallways. That's where Officer Dunn and his partner entered first. They moved cautiously, weapons drawn. The air smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and dust. Halfway down the corridor, Dunn noticed something strange, a single locker door hanging open. Inside, nothing but an old pair of gym shoes and a torn notebook. Then came a sudden thud, from behind them. They turned, lights sweeping the hall, but it was empty. The noise came again, this time from above, a vent cover rattling slightly. Dunn raised his flashlight, heart pounding. "Freeze!" he shouted. The rattling stopped. They approached slowly, scanning the ceiling. No movement. Just silence. A quick radio call confirmed no one had been found yet. The suspect was still somewhere inside the building. Then the intercom crackled unexpectedly, startling everyone. A calm voice spoke, unfamiliar, low, "You don't have to look anymore." Then static. By early afternoon, the lockdown had stretched past 3 hours. Students were hungry, exhausted, and terrified. Then, at 1:14 p.m., the PA system turned on again. A voice, Principal Alvarez's, said, "Teachers, you may begin evacuation procedures." Relief swept through the classrooms. But before anyone moved, the school resource officer burst into the radio channel, "Hold your positions. That order didn't come from us. Chaos erupted over the police radios. The intercom had been hijacked. When technicians checked the system, they found it had been activated remotely, from a maintenance panel near the gym. Officers rushed to the location, but when they arrived, the panel was open, wires hanging loose. No one was there. In the footage later recovered from that hallway, a faint shadow could be seen moving past the camera, too blurred to identify. Part 6, The False End. At 2:05 p.m., a team of officers discovered an unlocked service door near the auditorium, leading outside. Fresh footprints trailed off into the grass, ending abruptly at the parking lot. Believing the suspect had fled, police began carefully escorting students out. Mrs. Nolan's class was among the last to leave. They walked single file through the silent hallway, hands over heads, past shattered silence and flickering lights. Outside, dozens of parents stood behind barricades, some crying openly. Helicopters circled overhead. When the final students exited, police declared the building clear. But just as the scene began to calm, a janitor approached an officer. "There's still one light on," he said quietly. "In the basement." The officers exchanged uneasy looks. The basement wasn't supposed to have power.